to one of the most important things that we can do in adopting a minimum bar. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Carrie Larson, who's the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board Administrator, and I'll let her introduce her esteemed panel here. So,
thanks, Mom. Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us, guys. I want to just walk through just who's on stage really quick and who you're going to be hearing from, and then I'll give you a quick overview of what you're about to hear from us, and then we'll start digging in, because there's a lot that we're going to tell you, and then we really want your feedback. We want to hear from you and kind of get your input on where this code is going and what we're doing. So just to start off, I'm going to step behind here for a second. We've got Corolla Hanks. She is our chair of the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board, and she is representing executive fire officials on the board. That's what she was appointed for.
Hold it closer.
Oh, sorry. Is that better for you guys?
Yeah.
Can you hear me in the back? Wonderful. So this first wonderful person up here is Corolla Hanks. She is our chair of the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board. She was appointed to represent executive fire officials on the board. Next to her, we've got Chief Rick Ballantyne. He is our Aspen Fire Chief, local. Here's some cheers. Thank you. He was also appointed to represent the executive fire officials on the board. So we've got two of those representatives, and they're both here with us today. Next to Chief Ballantyne, we have Crystal Lambert. She is a Gunnison County building official, and she was appointed to represent a rural county that had previously adopted a WUI code. And then finally, we've got Jeffrey Woodruff. He is with the American Institute of Architects, and he's a Colorado local architect. He lives here in Aspen, Snowmass Village. And he was appointed to the board to represent the statewide organizations for architects. This is the panel that you'll be hearing from, but we're going to go ahead and jump in. So to give you guys a sense of really what we're doing, what we've been spending so much time on in the last 12 months since we started, it's really important to understand where this all started. Since the year 2000, we have had and seen in Colorado an increasing frequency, intensity, and devastation of our wildfires. You all know that, you've seen it, you've experienced it in your communities. We've had some of the largest and the most destructive wildfires in Colorado history in that time. And we've also seen an incredible increase in population. Our population has grown, I believe, over 750,000 residents between 2010 and 2020. That increase in population has led to an encroachment into this wildland-urban interface. We're going to get into that just a little bit more in depth in a little bit, of what that is and where that might be. But in 2021, we saw the Marshall Fire. We had over 1,000 homes lost, over 6,000 acres burned. In 2022, the following year, we had 835 wildfire incidents and over 625,000 acres burned. This is just a trend that we are seeing we don't expect to end. And we're also currently rated as one of the top 5 riskiest housing markets for wildfire damages, according to CoreLogic, which is one of our big influencers for insurance. A lot of that is due to hail, and a lot of that is due to wildfires. So now that you understand just the background to our fire problem in Colorado, including our growing population, I'm going to hand it over to Corolla Hanks. She's going to talk through how we got to the establishment of the board.
Thank you. You'll have to tell me when I'm speaking too loud, not too quiet. So, how did we get here? Well, in 2019, the state of Colorado passed a bill which created the Colorado Fire Commission. And the Colorado Fire Commission's purpose was to evaluate and provide insight to our legislature and our state governing bodies on the capacity of the fire service and the challenges associated with it. And so, as this wildfire scenario came about, And we decided that we really did have a problem, even though we'd been hiding it in our back pocket for many years, right? Governor Polis sent a letter to that Colorado Fire Commission and said, I need your help. I need you to do some research and come back to me in a really quick amount of time and provide me with information on what we can do to make a difference in Colorado so that we can retain our insurance, right? That we can actually handle the fires that we have and that our residents are safe. So the Colorado Fire Commission took that on. We were very pleased to do so, and they appointed a subcommittee, of which I was very lucky to be part of. That subcommittee must have had 60 people, 70 people at some point in time, from all walks of life and all places in the state. And they came back with a recommendation that they provided to the Colorado Fire Commission. And that commission voted to move that forward unanimously. So initially it goes forward. They draft a bill fairly quickly and then decide to withdraw that for the next session, right? To take that, to make sure they did the right thing. So that's what they did. So Senate Bill 166, and sometimes I get the numbers wrong, so I always have to look, comes along and it creates the Wildfire Commission. And it has the mission within it of, and I'm going to read this, although I hardly ever read slides, but ensuring the Colorado communities are safe from and more resilient to wildfires by reducing the risk to people and property through the adoption of statewide codes and standards on best practice approaches to hardening structures, reducing fire risk in the defensible space, surrounding structures in the wildland-urban interface in Colorado. And in doing that, that's the mission, they gave us some guidelines. Those guidelines have not been easy, okay? This has been a challenge. However, we had a timeline, which we're going to go over, that we have to meet, which is probably the fastest code timeline I've ever seen in my career, or will ever see again. So remember that, Mike, next time we do this, okay? But I look at Mike and I get distracted. So one of the things that we had to do was to define the wildland-urban interface. And you have heard today and yesterday that that is probably one of the most difficult things that we can do, especially because we've heard over the last couple days, this is not a place, but a set of conditions. And those conditions change regularly. So we've been tasked with that. We should adopt a minimum codes and standards, and this doesn't always make sense to code people, that is based on best practices, but it's a minimum code. Those two don't always go together. We were to identify the hazards and types of buildings and the places where this code would apply across the state. Is Aspen the same as La Junta? No, they each have their benefits, but they're different. Establish a process for a governing body to petition the board for modification to that code. Because you remember, when you adopt a code, when the state adopts a code, that code can be amended on a local level when they adopt it. But it can never be less restrictive than the state code. It can be more restrictive, but not less. So how do we work through that process? So we needed a method, to develop a method where people could modify it and petition for that. And maybe that includes modifying a map or using a different map, something. But it still meets the intent of this code. So following a huge amount of discussion, argument, but generally agreeing with some reservation, and reviewing NFPA and IWUIC and Oregon and California and Australia and all these places, we agreed to abide by the following definition. And that is that the wildland-urban interface, and I think you've heard this on NFPA, that geographical area where structures and other human development meets or intermingles with wildland or vegetative fuels. That is the definition that we are functioning under. What I want you to remember when you walk away from here, that may be the definition, but that is not necessarily where this code as we develop it will apply. Portions of the WUI may have code and portions of it may not. So remember, there's a general definition, but that's where we are.
All right. So to walk us through, and in order to get us to all of those key tasks that we were assigned in statute, I wanted to just have you take a look at who all is represented on this board. This is very much a Colorado code. It is going to be designed by residents of Colorado for residents of Colorado. This is very unique to our state, and we want to keep it that way. And that's why we're seeking your input. We're going to be doing that a lot more in the coming months. But there are 21 voting members on this board. I'm not going to go through them all, but we have building code professionals, we have fire professionals, we have industry professionals from the building service and from contractors. We've got architects. We have local elected representatives. All of that and more represented on this board from varying areas across the state, from southwest Colorado up through the I-70 corridor, along the Front Range and in the east, because we're doing this for the entire state. So 21 voting members from across the state representing a bunch of different industries in order to get to those key tasks. As Carola mentioned, we're on a really tight timeline. We were established by statute May of 2023. We were appointed to this board in September of last year, and coming up on a year now, October 20th was our inaugural meeting of this board. They have met every single month since then for 6 hours every month as the board. We have 4 advisory committees that are meeting usually 2, if not more, times per month for multiple hours. We have strike forces that are getting into the details to bring recommendations to those committees. They are devoting an incredible amount of time into this development so that it's specific to our state and so that we meet this timeline. If we work backwards, this code needs to be adopted according to our law by June 30th, July 1st next year. In order to do that with our rulemaking process, we're going to be holding public hearings end of April into early May of next year. And before that, we will have a draft code that is ready to go into this process by the end of March. So at the latest, you will see a draft version in full by the end of March. What we're hoping is to get you that draft code in hand. You can start working with us, see it in its full form by about mid-January. In pieces, you're going to start seeing that very soon. So keep an eye on some of those virtual sessions. We're going to be seeking that input very quickly. One of the things to note is that when we adopt this code on or before July 1st next year, jurisdictions then have 3 months to adopt it. So your local jurisdictions have until October 1st of 2025 to adopt the code. And then they'll have 3 months at the latest to come into compliance with the code after that. So those are just some key timelines. It's a short deadline for all of us. It's a short deadline for all of you as well. As I mentioned, our inaugural meeting was October of last year. We held that in Frisco. We have met in all of those red dots throughout the state. We are coming in person to as many places as we can to get as much input as we can. Our next meeting will be next Friday in Fort Collins. That's that green dot up at the top. And then in November, we'll be meeting in La Junta. But we will also have 4 public hearings. These are official hearings that will occur sometime late next winter, early next spring. And those 4 locations are listed on the right side of the left side of the screen for you. Up here will be in Castle Rock, Glenwood Springs, Sterling, and Montrose. So keep those dates in mind, but refer back to our website. We really want you to come and join us in person if you can. If you can't be there in person, join us virtually. That's all posted on the website. And as a reminder, these positions are 3-year terms. If you are interested in serving, keep us in mind, reach out. We're going to be filling positions over the next couple of years as well. So I'm going to pass this along, and we're going to start getting into what we're considering for the development of this code.
Hey, Scary. First of all, how many other fire chiefs are in the room by show of hands? Well, for all y'all, I'll have a crayon version of our slides tonight, so you can come up here and get those for you, okay? And I actually drew this short straw so I can talk about mapping. But first, before we do that, I couldn't be this close to our fire district without talking a little bit about Aspen Fire. Is that okay? I'm going to do it anyway. Real quick, Aspen Fire District protection was established in 1881 as a volunteer fire department, and mostly stayed that way except for fire chief until July 2020, after getting a successful mill levy increase, was approved by voters in 2018. Currently, AFD fully staffs 2 of our 5 stations, 24/7. 3 other stations have firefighters living at them. The mill levy approval also allows the financial ability to build housing. We built 15 units out of that mill levy, and we're looking for other housing opportunities now. So, and also, Aspen Fire District in our county was one of the first to adopt early detection wildfire cameras. That picture you're seeing on the screen right now, that's from the smuggler prescribed burn we had a year or 2 ago. That we were able to monitor the wildfire, the burn very closely, which saved a lot of resources coming from us and from the state to come check out hotspots. This is the one we just had last week on Highlands. This particular technology allows you to, if you get two cameras pick up the same fire, it gives you a lat long. We were able to give that lat long to arriving firefighters and aircraft and be able to find exactly where it is. So that's brief history. I think Corolla mentioned it, but I'm going to mention it again. The geographic, the WOI definition agreed upon by this code board and voted on, the geographical area where structural and human developments meet or intermingles with wildland and vegetative fuels. The code board also did extensive research on other states and jurisdictions' wildfire severity maps and methodology, including California Fire Hazard Severity Zone maps. And I'm just going to read a little bit from what they had, because it's going to compare a lot to what we have, what we're going to be doing. Per their public resources code, it directed the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, CAL FIRE, to map fire hazard within state responsibility areas based on fuel loading, slope, fire weather. That's going to come up again many times in this presentation. And other relevant factors present, including areas where winds have been identified by the department as a major cause of wildfire spread. These zones referred to as fire hazard severity zones. That's going to come up again too. Classify a wildland zone as moderate, high, or very high hazards based on the average across the entire area within the zone. We also did extensive research with Oregon Department of Forestry, ODF. Following the work of the Governor's Council there on wildfire response, the broad devastation of the 2020 Labor Day fire event, Oregon legislature passed what they call Bill 762. Subsequently, ODF and Oregon State University were tasked with developing a statewide wildfire hazard map that shows people the hazard level for the area they live in, based on weather, climate, topography, and vegetation, aka severity. Noting, while wildfire risk can be mitigated through actions at the community and property level, wildfire hazards cannot. The Oregon Wildfire Hazard Map purposes are to educate Oregon residents assist in prioritizing fire adoption and mitigation resources, and identify where municipal space standards and home hardening codes will apply, much like we're doing on the code board. We also looked at other comparisons with, such as Colorado Springs Fire Department, their hazard map for their area, and also our asthma fire protection map, which you can go on our website and see, which we were lucky enough to get a grant from a local foundation to put that in place previously. So we also looked at CORA, which is the the state forest map here in Colorado. That's also known as the Colorado Forest Atlas. It was developed to take into account Colorado's unique landscapes, type of vegetation, fuels, and other local and statewide considerations to make it an invaluable resource for our communities in Colorado with a level of detail and clarity that is comparable or superior to other mapping products. Research by the code board, for instance, their resolution is 20 meters opposed to most other mapping, which are 30 meters. And after extensive research from all these different resources and alternative options, the code board recently voted to utilize the Colorado State Forest Service CORA Fire Intensity Scale Map Layer as the reference tool. Remember, a reference tool for helping to identify and establish areas within Colorado that would be designated as either low, medium, and high. That's how they're going to be designated. WUI hazard zones per the WUI definition agreed upon by the board, you heard earlier. With the expectation that there may be exemptions, or there will be exemptions, to the code for certain areas that are currently being reviewed by the implementation and mapping strike force that Carrie mentioned. That will be subject to the full code board review and approval. Also under review currently is the process for AHJs that may have their own risk or hazard map in place, the ability to petition the code board for validation and approval of its use in lieu of CORA map. Additionally, per mandate of the Colorado SB23-166, the code board, the Code Implementation and Governance Committee is currently working on a process by which a governing body may petition the board for a modification to the codes to the full board. It is intended of this board to allow and encourage the local AHJ to have a pathway to provide input that can paint a much better picture of your community than potentially can be captured by a risk map or by a snapshot on the severity map. It's important, it's always in our mind, is that each county in Colorado is unique, with a character shaped by individual history, land, climate, the people, and the resources. However, something every county in the state shares is the potential to be negatively affected by wildfires. I think we can all agree on that. We've got a couple different slides to talk about fire intensity, because that's what we're going to be using. Fire intensity basics can be summed up by the flame length, flame height, flame zone, depth. Obviously, low intensity fires will have low flames that stay close to the ground, while high or extreme fires have very high flames that spread quickly and are hard to predict. It's just similar information, but I kind of like the picture, so I put it up anyway. Fire alarm hazard intensity. 3 parameters make up fire hazard severity. Fuels, critical weather, frequency, slope are all critical to gauge how likely the fire is to spread. First, fuels. Fuels, that's the surface and canopy characteristics. Live and fuel moisture, temperature and relative humidity, wind speed and direction, elevation, slope, and aspect. This is one thing I found I think it was on the Forest Atlas somewhere, is kind of comparing the fire intensity scale, because not everybody can maybe know what that is, but if you compare it to like the Richter scale for earthquakes, if you're talking to people, it makes it a little bit easier to understand, what does this really mean? And it's important to keep in mind risk equals hazard times vulnerability. Probability, the likelihood of a fire burning at a specific place during a specific time. Intensity, the characteristics of a fire that causes effects should a fire occur. The exposure, location, resources of assets with respect to the wildland hazard. Susceptibility, the relationship between fire behavior, outcomes, expected impacts from different intensity fires. This is just a snapshot of our Aspen area showing the fire intensity scale layer from the CORA map. That's what it looks like. It doesn't look very pretty, does it? All red. But basically, in summary, fire intensity is a crucial metric for gauging how likely a fire is to spread, how challenging it will be to control, and the potential damage to vulnerable structures or development. Fire intensity plays a significant role in our upcoming code development and defining the WUI. So the group of the entire code board reviews all these things and take all these into consideration, every decision, every vote that we make. Thank you.
Oh, so to develop a wildfire resiliency code for Colorado, the board has been looking at existing codes and standards to help with ideas and approaches for structural hardening, vegetation planning, and management. Among these codes is the California Building Code, Chapter 7A, the International Wildland Urban Interface Code from the ICC, and NFPA 1140, Standard for Wildland Fire Protection. Processing, and next slide. Additional resources and guides that we are using, among them is the Home Ignition Zone Guide from the Colorado State Forest Service, and this is a fun one, Fire Hazard Mitigation Methodologies from NIST, and additionally considerations for ignition-resistant plants for vegetation around structures is also being considered. Through the code development process, the board has been thoughtful about cost considerations related to the requirements of a code. Implementation costs, for one, materials costs, and labor costs. The board has relied heavily on input from Colorado construction industry board members for feedback and guidance about this. Insurability has been a prominent concern to the board throughout the entire code development process. And we have taken to looking at when we have proposed code language, proposed ideas, cross-checking them with the IBHS standards, as well as our Colorado insurance industry representative on the board, who has been helpful in taking our questions and concerns to the Colorado Insurance Commission, coming back to us with answers. It's been very helpful. And then the board is also considering other jurisdictions that have already done this. They have already adopted a wildfire code. And what are the takeaways from that? What are the things that worked? What are the things that didn't work? One of the therapeutic things for me being on the board, and hopefully is helpful for the board, is for me to share my experience as a building official who has implemented the International Wildland Urban Interface Code in the unincorporated areas of rural Gunnison County. And there was a lot of good things that came of it. There was a lot of things that we could have done better. There was some things that we should not have done at all. And so I enjoy sharing that with the board and speaking up when I need to make sure that if there's anything I can do so that that doesn't happen again to similar jurisdictions in Colorado, I've said my piece, and I've hopefully given some good input. And also other jurisdictions like Eagle County. Jefferson County, different states, Oregon, California. There's a lot to draw from, and so we've been with eyes wide open, looking at all of it and taking it all in.
So no one has shown a firebrand flower to date. 2 days, no flowers. It's the first one. You have to be impressed. So the science applies. Everything we've done over the past year, we've gone back to NIST, we've gone back to IWUIC, we've gone back to NFPA, and so what are the decisions we're looking to make as a board informed by science, and again, the best Ember firebrand flower you've seen over 2 days. So the science applies, firebrands, convection, radiation, all apply. So if we're driven to be a Colorado code, what are the 3 things we're looking at in every decision we make? 1 is insurability. 2 is, how are we doing relative to the existing building code? So the existing building code is fantastic at saying you need an R60, an R40, an R20, right? Here's the envelope, here's the building envelope. 10 minutes, seriously, I just got out. Wow, man, they don't let the architects speak. So the 3 columns are, how are we doing? Basically a check mark. How are we doing against ICC, or IRC and IBC? Are we meeting or exceeding building code? Because part of this is the code has to apply even where building codes don't exist in the state of Colorado. The second criteria, and the reason, this is tiny, the second is insurability. How close are we coming to IBHS and what IBHS has in baseline and optimum? And so each of the times we're swaying from IBHS recommendations on home hardening, how are we doing? So for example, we're sitting with Chief Lacey from Fort Collins, and having a conversation about ignition-resistant plants. In IBHS, there's no ignition. There's no planting in the first 5 feet. Thank you for shaking your head. There's no planting within 5 feet of the home. So if we're going to harden the home and harden both the structure and the site, when are we deviating from IBHS? And the third column is how are we doing versus IWUIC. Roughly 15.87% of the state right now is on some form of IWUIC. So we're speaking to both the folks that have adopted a WUI code, if you don't have a code whatsoever, a building code, so we're bringing you up to basically a baseline IBC and IRC, and we're also looking at how are we doing in the community relative to IWUIC. So again, first firebrand rows, and first building section. It's always good when the architect gets to go last. So how can we detail this? We can use masonry. We actually, if you go back a page, sorry, it's the 5 minutes that threw me. I put in the bottom of the slide, and I'll walk over. One of the cool things about IWUIC is it gives you 5 options for a wall assembly. This is a Colorado code. You can still use wood. You can still have a wood-clad building over a 1-hour firewall. It is a permitted use. But what we're saying is you also need to do the following protective measures in terms of site hardening to keep embers away from your home and reduce direct flame impingement. So there's a balance that we're striking between structure hardening and site hardening, but again, I think the room should be pleased with what we've described at the bottom, which is, again, right out of IWUIC. So the reason why it has a yellow hash is it's equal to IWUIC. It gives you 5 options for your wall assembly. So the 2 assemblies we're looking at are roof assembly, obviously asphalt shingle. Masonry, we can use masonry still in Colorado. And there's a fiber cement wall section in there. On site design and fuel modification, we're working closely, thank you, with Daniel Beveridge, who's sitting with Patty Clapper, County Commissioner from Pitkin County, and going and working with Daniel and the Colorado State Forest Service on all of our prescriptive and what we're taking in terms of site mitigation and site hardening. So again, that first 5 feet, yes, you can use ignition-resistant plants. As Crystal pointed out, we're looking at both the Vail Guide as well as the Colorado State Forest Guide to ignition-resistant planting. And then for those of us in rural Colorado who have larger parcels, We can go out to 30 feet with tree spacing and tree pruning, as well as out to 100 feet. So if you're on a 1 acre lot in a moderate or high zone, there's going to be additional defensible space requirements that will apply. So we're sticking with the HIZ that you're all used to, the 0 to 5, 5 to 30, 30 to 100, no surprises there. Again, from a building standpoint, no surprises. We're really sticking with what does the science say? Is the best coming from NIST? Is the best coming from NFPA? Or is the best coming from IWIC? And coming up with a code that suits Colorado. It's also, from a truth standpoint, we have the basis of design out of the Waldo fire, out of the Marshall fire. And so in each of these conversations where we say, okay, here's what the code currently says that we can take in terms of best practice, but here's what we've also seen in the field, and this is a better way of hardening a structure or hardening a site. So I will leave you with your own mission, because I think it's important. A recognized leader in wildland fire risk mitigation and resilience. That's the end of the mission for FACO. And so I believe not only can Colorado come up with a code as good as, but I think based on the resources and the people in the room, we can be better than some of the adopted codes that are currently out there in the US. Thank you. I don't think we've come up with the catchiest email address, but this is the way to get in touch with us. And to be honest, we would love your feedback. When we go to places that, by the way, don't have plumbing, and we've been to at least one in the state that doesn't have interior plumbing, we get 3 to 5 people showing up. So to have a full room, a banquet, we're so thankful. And we look forward to your feedback.
So we're gonna go ahead and move into that feedback. We wanna get some questions from you, some comments from you. I will remind you all that everything that we're currently presenting, it's still in draft. We're still having discussions every month. We're still having discussions every week. All of those are open to the public, so please join in if you can. All of our committee meetings are virtual options for our board meetings. Like I said, next Friday we'll be in Fort Collins at CSU. But we're gonna open it up for questions. So we're gonna pass this off to Paul. He's gonna start us off.
I have a question. So you were talking about how you use the Colorado State Forest Atlas, I believe, to come up with the what you're going to use for the mapping and stuff. And I guess my question is, in relationship to the code and that map, the area that was impacted by the Marshall fire is listed as low on that map. However, it meets many of the criteria you originally talked about in terms of high winds, slope, etc. So I guess I'm just wondering if maybe, you're not the Forest Service, but if they're gonna update that map, or if you're considering other things too, or if areas like that back up to grasslands, as we talked about some today, will potentially be included in that area?
Was that said hopefully?
Yes, I guess. Yes and no, but yeah.
So I think there are a number of things. No matter which map we ended up with, and in looking at all these maps, none of these maps are 100% accurate, right? From what we see on the ground. From the day a map is made, things literally change on the ground, right? A building is built, something is scraped, a tree is cut, there was a landslide, something changed on that map. So a key part of this is providing a map that is a reference document from which to start from. And that within there has to be some local allowances, et cetera, to put in to allow for that ground truthing, right? I know that I heard the laugh. Ground truthing is hard. And some places have already been able to do it, and my hats are off to them. But there has to be a way to allow that allowance. So maybe something comes in, and it comes in through planning, and you look at the map and you say, well, I started here, but what I'm looking at on the map and what's over there doesn't make much sense, right? How do we solve that? Which is where we have to give some local control and give an option to do that. We also have talked about providing the option for a place that can develop its own map, that we know is a better map than what we can provide them with today, right? Because we talked about maps a lot today, right? But it's better. How can they appeal to the code to ask for a modification of the code that says, hey, we have a map and it's a better map. It takes all these things into consideration, but we have a better map and we want to use this. Can we do so? And what's the process to do that? And that is part of this process that we are looking for. I recognize it. And we understand that. Now, just so you know, the Colorado State Forest Service map, they are on a 3-year update schedule, and they are currently trying to find a way, no promises, but they are currently trying to find a way to update that to a 2-year cycle. That's all about funding, right? We all know that. Does that answer your question?
Basically, yes.
Anybody have something they want to add?
Quick question on decking material. I don't know if you're far enough along in terms of architectural design elements and so on. California, as I understand it, requires a B-rated decking material. Is there going to be something comparable, like the minimum Class B rated, fire-rated decking material? That's it.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and sorry I glanced over it. So there was the word draft up there, and then we went through it quickly. From a decking standpoint, we really talked about the walking surface. We're not worried about the rim joist. We're not worried about the floor joist. It's literally a non-combustible surface or ignition-resistant surface. We haven't gotten detailed in terms of the class rating of whether it's Trex or TimberTech or brands, so we focused on the walking surface. Sorry, and I really didn't deep dive on any of the building attributes. So we've had, what I think the important takeaway is that where there's no IBC or IRC, where there's no adopted building code, this is the first time we're seeing a building code. So we've got to say, okay, how do we do versus IBC and IRC existing? And there's times where we're actually better than. So for example, your gable vent today, if your IRC is a 1/4 inch, and obviously the science, whether it's NIST or elsewhere, is at 1/16 or maximum of an 1/8. And so we're moving the needle, and that's where we're saying, you know, we're meeting or exceeding the existing building or residential code. So.
This is Jamie Gomez with the West Region Wildfire Council. I think I wrote down October 1st of 2025 for county code adoption, and then a certain amount of time after that to actually come into compliance or something. I didn't quite catch all the details, but I know there's probably representatives from counties in this state that are extremely capacity constrained, funding constrained, and I'm just curious in terms of the enforcement or the implementation of this code, especially thinking about those rural counties that have capacity constraints, may only have a few employees total, the whole county. How are they going to be able to implement this code?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking it, because we didn't really get into all of the details and all the sections of the bill, but one of the things is, yes, according to statute, we have until July 1st to adopt this, and then 3 months after that, local jurisdictions need to adopt it. What we can do is, built into this statute is a request for support for enforcement. If you don't have the rules and regulations in place to enforce a code, you can request support, and DFPC, the Division of Fire Prevention and Control, will come in and they can help enforce it for you. We are also working through our Implementation and Governance Committee, acknowledging that it's a tight timeline and there are resource constraints for everyone. What can we do, what can we make to help facilitate the adoption, to help facilitate the implementation and the enforcement? So if there are documents or a toolkit that we can create for you to help get this going, and then you can specify it to what you need in your local jurisdiction, we want to do that. So send us your information, what would be most beneficial to you. If you have some people who can come and do an inspection, but you don't know where to start, let us know that, and we can start creating some inspection checklists or documents for you. If it would be helpful to have a suggestion on this size of a jurisdiction with this capacity and resource constraint, how would we implement it? We can look at some of the local jurisdictions who have already done this and tell you how they've done it and give that as an example. But there is that part of statute. You can always request support from the Division of Fire Prevention and Control, and we will work with you to show you what that process looks like.
I think, I see there's a hand, but beforehand, I want to say this. This timeline that is dictated by the bill's statute, right, which we didn't put in place, is something that we've acknowledged. And there is some conversation that we are looking to move forward to say, how can we make this so that it is doable? Because there are jurisdictions in this state where 3 months doesn't meet the requirements of even how they have to notify and the processes they have to go through. And we recognize that. So as this board, our role in this is, we have this bill and this is where we are, is how do we communicate with the legislature and the Fire Matters Committee and those two? How do we make this work, right? And our goal is to find a solution to move this forward, right? This is for Colorado, and everybody is challenged. We are all challenged. That does not mean if you adopt by October 1, and I think this is important, that you are compliant in enforcing the code on October 1. There is the January 1 timeline, which is that next 3 months, which helps, but doesn't resolve everything. But it's also why I will tell you when you go home to your communities now, too many people have come to me and said, well, we're waiting till you write the code and you give it to us. Okay, too late, right? You have 3 months. You need to know what your community needs to do. Do you need to ask for a modification to the code? Do you need to add something to meet the needs of your community? You need to be working on that today and what those challenges are. Don't kick the can down the road waiting for this code to show up on your doorstep, right? You're going to miss something. This is too important statewide for all of us to miss if we can avoid it. Does that make sense?
All right, we got time for one more quick question.
Are there going to be any retrofitting requirements for structure or vegetation, or does this only apply to new construction, additions, short-term rentals, etc.?
Thanks. Again, this goes back into not getting into the details of that code. So thanks for asking this question. This code only applies to new construction, new development, and significant, what we're terming significant remodels. There's qualifications of what that means in the bill, but basically 25% or more is repaired, reconstructed, altered, or you have an addition of 500 square feet or more. Again, I can send you the information from the bill, or you can look up the specific sections to outline what those requirements are, but there is no retrofitting. It is only for those specific sections. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you all for your time. I know everybody will be sticking around, so let's get All righty.